When the sun goes down, we become entombed in darkness.
In the 90s, there wasn't a British black metal scene.
People were more focused on the Scandinavian scene and the bands like Dark Throne and Emperor and Gorgoroth and the controversy that surrounded that with the church burns and things like that.
Until recent years, until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, there was black metal from the UK, but there was nothing really of any note apart from maybe a handful of bands.
It's not something which is new to Great Britain, but it's nice to see that it's getting attention and the whole thing's taking shape.
If you're looking at British black metal circa 2014, 2015, what sets it apart is a diversity. There are stylistic links between some bands like Winterfylleth and Woden's Throne. I think there are some stylistic links there, and ourselves with Woden's Throne. But I think there is a fierce individuality about British black metal.
I don't think it's yet got its own, at least I wouldn't think its own established sound, you know, in the way that you have the Norwegian sound or the Polish sound or the Swedish sound that people sort of associate with certain bands.
All the great bands there were, you know, Catty and Throne, Balsagoth, Winterfylleth, all those Akercock, all those more traditional bands, they were more influenced by the Scandinavian stuff because they were from that time, but I don't think they were ever thinking let's do something like we are, others are trying to do, because they were of that period, and I think we are out of this one.
There's a very DIY aspect to the scene now, and in a way that kind of harkens back to the early days in the 90s when guys were like recording stuff on, you know, 4-track tape players in a barn somewhere in Norway, you know.
Because black metal has always had a DIY ethic. I mean, you can record a video on your iPhone and just plug straight into a laptop, program your drums, and there you are, you've got a band, you've got a Facebook page, and somebody might like what you're doing.
I think there's a by any means necessary aspect to the scene.
The one thing that I've always enjoyed about alternative music is that there's a sense of togetherness, almost like a community. It doesn't matter whether you play in a band or whether you hand out flyers or you work at a merch stall.
But it is thanks to those people. If you don't have the promoters that put this stuff on, then it's not going to happen. Our label, Candlelight, has always seems to have been very supportive of particularly the UK scene.
I think without Candlelight right now, the scene wouldn't be growing that much.
Black metal vacuum and sucking.
We've always been quite sort of self-sufficient in that regard. We've had Godrear, which were a small sort of label, so there's a lot of these labels sort of below that level, and a lot of the time these are just, you know, like a couple of guys or one guy who just really loves the music.
When I was starting it, you know, a lot of bands at the time were still doing the Satanism and nihilism sort of stuff, or I want something that's like real, because the music's passionate. There needs to be something that's researched and something that we felt passionate about. Chose the name Eastern Front because it's the most brutal campaign of World War II. It kind of made sense to take that with the extreme music.
Some of our songs are an actual story, whereas some represent an emotion, a perceived emotion from our perspective, because we went there and we can only research the subject. If you actually read the lyrics and you take our lyrics and then you go on Google or Wikipedia or wherever and you actually even check the dates, everything's correct. I was even researching what the bombs were made of, because that was part of the lyric, is, you know, falling steel. So I wanted to make sure they were made of steel, they weren't made of something else, because then you'll have somebody pop up on Facebook or any other social media site and say, well, actually, I think you've got that wrong.
It's quite easy to get the, you know, the machine gun sound with the blast beats and stuff like that, but we use samples as well with the tanks, and I know there's a few bands that do it, like obviously everyone says about Marduk, like some people are, Panzer Division Marduk, I was like, yeah, but it's a very fast, full-on 30 minutes blast beats. Whereas,
it's very relentless, isn't it? Whereas we have so many different textures in our music to, we feel, kind of convey emotion. If you're very sombre about a subject, very difficult to be that way.
I guess black metal's somewhat different to everyone, really. Like whether you're sort of, I don't know, going on what your sort of forebears have done before you, or try to create something new.
I've often said it's like Guinness. That's what they say. It's very heavy, it's very black, and it's a very acquired taste.
When I first heard it, you know, I laughed. I just went, what the hell is this? I thought it was an effect at the beginning and then it was going to go into music, which it didn't. But then what happens, I think, is you can't believe what you're hearing that much, and then your ear tunes into it and you can see what they're trying to get at.
When I finally started listening to it and discovered black metal, it was just like, it'd always been there, if you know what I mean. It hit me so hard because it was like, wow, this is what I've always been looking for. Going to castles in Wales when I was a kid, you know, all that sort of stuff, it was like, it's always been there for me. So it's just finally discovered a music which actually, you know, had all that. It was just like somebody turned on a light switch.
I think it's a very diverse genre, you can really do anything you like with. It's really truly freedom of expression for me.
It tends to focus on music that has a sense of the spiritual and the dark to it. It doesn't necessarily need to be conventional Satanism or even LaVeyan Satanism, but it has to have something dark and thoughtful behind it.
It is just the most expressive form of extreme music, you know. It's something that when you play, you can really feel it, you know, like through your body when you're performing it. Like, it's strenuous, and it actually feels like a physical, energetic release.
What lots of modern metal bands forget, I think, is that guitars have 6 or more strings on them.
One of the main things that attracted me to black metal in the first place was the fact that I suddenly heard full chords being played on a guitar, distorted, and you could hear the chord. And you can fashion these riffs that sounded very eerie.
Unlike other genres of metal, where it's very defined by specific musicality or anything like that, black metal is more of an atmosphere.
With atmosphere, I think you have to really restrain yourself as a drummer. If I overplayed too much, it would distract the listener from the atmosphere. And atmosphere is the key element of black metal in general.
This whole ethos of being true black metal, well, I'm a great believer in the fact that if you weren't there at the start, then you weren't. But for Christ's sake, get over it.
It's almost idiotic to kind of think that, right, we're a black metal band, therefore there are certain things that we need to do or certain things that we need to say or and present ourselves in a certain way. And I think that's sort of counter what black metal is about.
When we first started the band, we were really kind of travelling about the place, going to lots of different cities, different towns, looking at lots of local history. So places like Mantor in the Peak District, places like Alderley Edge where the legend of the kind of Merlin came from, Brythnoth, which was about a famous kind of leader king, and that was from sort of East Anglia way. So a lot of it was tended to be about local history and interesting stories from specific places. The second album was more about people, so ancient stories about people, the wanderer, the wayfarer, about famous battles, the Battle of Brunanburh. More so on that album, we started to then relate the old text back to, I guess, modern social political context, making people aware of what's going on behind the scenes in the political realm, in the sense that you were told one thing in the media, in the news, about what's going on, and actually there's some other puppet master kind of pulling the strings. So one of the songs Warrior Heard, for example, is about how we send our troops off to battle under the premise that they are kind of
defending their nation.
Defending their
when
nation.
in actual fact, they're not really. They're corporate mercenaries that have been hired to look after the greed of multinational corporations, essentially.
We kind of revere our soldiers as being heroes, and we treat them as heroes, and we've grown up in a culture that reveres war veterans and all that sort of stuff. And in many ways we should, because they go into it with the right intentions, but they
that's right. That's not to take anything away from the people that actually fight in the armed services. They do it under the best of intentions, but they are basically manipulated by politicians and the multinational corporations that influence the politicians on policy.
The Trinity of Triumph then was an album that sort of looked at ancient spirituality in terms of how people viewed the process from birth right through to death, and it was about celebrating someone that you love that you've lost, and the various different stages about how they believed the spirit kind of passed on from one realm into the other. And that was a really interesting view on how ancient cultures viewed religion and spirituality, how religion is kind of a huge plague on humanity, and how it's really been the root of a lot of evil in the world and continues to be to this day.
A lot of bands in England are now about heritage.
When we're on tour, we'll go to heritage sites, and we'll go to sort of castles, and we'll go to anywhere where there's legends. We'll immerse ourselves in that. We'll go and enjoy it.
You've got bands that go from the avant-garde. I mean, Norway's been a complete fucking revelation in the sense of avant-garde metal. It's very focused on nature and their Norwegian surroundings, whereas bands like ourselves in Yorkshire, we have a very industrial background, and it's just got a different aesthetic and a different feel. We've got bands like My Dying Bride, we've got a Paradise Lost. Yorkshire it's a fucking miserable place.
The general feeling of what it's like to live in this country in this day and age does kind of cause some struggles. There's a certain claustrophobic feeling and sort of discomfort that comes from being in a city,
I think Voices are doing something very interesting. They do something with a truly British style. Even in their subject matter, they're not trying to emulate anything that's gone before. They are just who they are. They're making dark music, and they're not afraid of drifting into other genres.
They do a bit more sort of off the wall stuff. We play with them Bleeds, and they kind of split the audience a little. There was guys who were going, I hate these guys, and I really enjoyed it.
Certainly going back to the Fence, it's almost like having a top-up of inspiration. I mean, if I'm wandering around in the Fence, if I get back to my parents' house, I'd be like, I need a guitar. It's a sense of intoxication. It's almost like taking a drug of some description, and you have to capture that high while it's still sort of flowing through you. It really is that sort of feeling.
It's hard not to love nature. I don't really understand people who don't. There's certain history to our country and to the land that it's worth reading about, worth enjoying.
The lyrics is more about promoting individuality and spirituality, and part of spirituality is finding identity, and part of finding identity is discovering and appreciating where it is that you're from. But I'd say the surroundings come into it more musically for me.
As from where I'm from, Harrogate, it's known for being a fairly upmarket spa town, but horrible things happen all over the place. People get murdered and fires, arson attacks, rape, it happens everywhere. People have different ways of coping with their experiences. Some people do silly things and end up in jail. I write angry music.
Just because you're in a good place doesn't mean that you're going to come out with something that's necessarily happy-go-lucky music.
songs are based on British folklore. We'll often have a large sort of folder of ideas. There's so much rich folklore in the UK. We have many, many stories to draw from. And this kind of ranges from all the way down south up to there's one in Ireland. I think we've got some Scottish songs. We've got the songs like Isabel, the Queen of Scottish Witches, and then we've got a lot of local ones. There's a disproportionate amount of local songs to us. There's things like the Sockburn Worm, that's very local, and it's interesting to go to these places because we can visit them and sort of get involved with them. We have a more of a personal link to the songs then. Our drummer and our guitarist, so they really wanted to kind of do something based on British folklore. They used to take a lot of trips out into the Lake District, and that was kind of where we got the name from. They found this old corpse road. They'd heard of corpse roads, but they didn't realise they were all over the UK. And that basically became the inception for our first tune. A lot of our lyrics are taken directly from original sort of stories, so we go to quite great lengths to be faithful to the original sort of stories. So you'll see bits of Shakespeare and Wordsworth and things like that turn up in our lyrics. And then there'll often be other parts that are completely original. The line that we tread is one between sort of very extreme heavy sound. We have all the black metal screams, and we're not afraid of the odd death metal riff, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I found that a lot of our music has melody. It's something that some bands shy away from, and that works for them. But for us, I think that we like tuneful melodies. It's strange. It's black metal you could hum.
Live shows are all about energy, the connection between the performer and the audience. You feed off each other, it's good to have an energetic crowd, and at the same time, it's good for the crowd to see an energetic band.
We like to think that when we're on stage, we turn the stage into our war zone. We just build the stage, the barbed wire, our own strobes to represent like bombing and stuff like that, and a lot of smoke that we use.
Live shows for us as a band are really important, and we're not about theatrics. It's about delivery, it's about performance, and it's about connection.
It's about the sound first, the sonic power, getting people listening to the music, rather than sort of coming away and saying how great the Watcher's cape was or whatever,
I got a call at work from this fucker saying they needed someone to step in for Byron who couldn't do a show. Well, at the time I wasn't a front man. I'd never been in that position. We were actually driving down to the venue. I rang Tarkan up and he was put on the spot, and he said, I don't think I'm going to do it any justice, kind of thing. And then within 15 minutes he'd rang me back and went, I'll definitely be there. He asked me what songs we were playing, and I put his MP3 player on and just listened to him on the train over. So I turned up, did that show, and afterwards we started talking about doing a project that became Cold.
But how is it today?
We try and deliver
bit more of an assault on the senses when we play. Just standing on stage and just playing the guitar might as well be in a practice room.
Well, when you started, it's like on the first album there were only 4 of us, and we all played a couple of instruments each. And it's also, will it even work live? Because you literally can't do what's on the record live, and we just adapt it for a live environment, which is the backwards way around way that most bands work. We write the songs and record them, and then we work out how to do them live. But it seems to work.
I think it's very important in the UK that we have these big stages for extreme bands and different bands to play on, something to aspire to as opposed to just doing the rounds of the small clubs.
When you talk about Bloodstock and Damnation Festival, you talk about bands that have doing well for themselves and they deserve every right to be there. However, when you look at the very nature of what black metal is, or the very aesthetics in which the style was formed, I think it lends itself a lot more to underground environments.
You certainly can't discount little gigs. You can't be like, I'm only going to play festivals and never going to do these crappy little venues, because they're not crappy. They're great. This is what's keeping music alive in the UK. It's much more personal connection you have at a smaller gig. There's 50 people there, but they can all be going apeshit. You're right in each other's face.
Lots of people have criticised us for not being that traditional black metal image, particularly in a live environment. And I think we take that criticism, but it's been a conscious decision on our part not to involve ourselves in it. But in terms of a band that's now probably a 3rd generation black metal band that's come out in the mid to late 2000s, it doesn't feel right for us to try and parody those guys.
And we've always said, like with all the suits and the attire and stuff like that, that's our version of corpse paint. That's our way of changing our identity and becoming these the pseudonyms.
It can be very, very powerful. There are bands that take it too far and make it far too elaborate. And I think if you're spending more time in the makeup chair than you are in the rehearsal room, then you may have your priorities slightly skewed.
Corpse paint should take 10 seconds. Slap some white and black or smear it all and cover yourself in blood. Done.
It kind of gives you like a defensive mask.
I actually feel that once you put the paints on, you become this alter ego where you are free to say what you're really feeling. It's not a pretense or an act. To me, it feels so much more genuine than conversing with someone in the street.
We've never called it corpse paint because that again would imply that we were something to do with the traditional true side of things, which would be insulting to those people because we're not part of that ideal. It's war paint, you put it on and you're in a different frame of mind.
There's guys like the Infernal Sea have different sort of things. They wear like sort of plague masks and hooded sort of looks, and I think each band can do that, but it's not for us.
In 1990, we ended up moving to a small village called Lakenheath in Suffolk, and that's where we spent most of our childhood.
Where our parents moved was right on the edge of the fens. You could look out across a very bleak and sort of unique landscape, which was growing up there. It had quite an impact, obviously, when you're sort of going through your early teens and you're sort of defining yourself as an individual and finding, establishing what you're interested in and your own personality. That was almost sort of seeping in subconsciously. It did have quite a profound effect. It was only upon coming to London and then going back there to visit that you sort of realise that how much it had touched you at that point. So.
The area that we grew up obviously extremely flat, so you were used to a lot of space, a lot of expansive skies. So when I first came to London, I did find it to be quite a claustrophobic experience and did sort of struggle a little bit with not only the amount of people but also the sort of close proximity of all the buildings and just the lack of space. And I tend to write all of my music on a fairly cheap acoustic guitar because it's just the most honest sounding instrument for me, and there's no sort of preparation involved. Just sit down, get out and play, and that way you can hear the music you're writing in its purest form essentially.
Eventually the material will be played perhaps with a huge amount of distortion, but you're not hiding behind it when you're composing. As Ed says, you're stripping it down to the actual bare form, and if you're writing a song and it hits you and it's just one guy strumming on a fairly cheap acoustic, the excitement of them bringing that to the table and hearing a full band delivering it is, that again, it's quite intoxicating. The last album, Carrying Skies, the lyrics were going back to being reflected on the follies of humanity and the struggles of the human condition, really. And despite the fact we live in supposedly civilized, a civilized technocratic society, ultimately we're still enthralled to the savagery and failings that have plagued our species for millennia. And I think certainly the last album, the lyrics are very much a reflection on that. I do try and steer away from using misanthropic as a way of describing our lyrical approach. That's not really the case. It's more just a sense of depression and desperation rather than just outright hatred. But I think sometimes that can be a little bit easy. That can be an easy tag for a black metal band to jump on and say, well, we're misanthropic, we hate human beings. It's like, well, do you? You probably still go to the pub and go to the supermarket. And, there is a line. I'm careful to sort of avoid falling into that sort of that well.
Progression and experimenting is a good thing in a sense, but it's not something to fear in black metal, because all those bands that created that second wave template, they were experimenting.
I don't think that black metal has ever been a stagnant thing. I mean, even when you look at the early bands, which a lot of people refer to when they try to define what black metal is or isn't, not those two bands sound the same. I mean, Darkthrone doesn't sound like Burzum, Bathory doesn't sound like Emperor. There's always a lot of diversity.
I think it's more about finding your own sound and doing something that means something to you personally.
A lot of bands actually don't sort of grasp that original feeling.
They want to recreate the classics, but by emulating them. Like, let's just sound like Mayhem for this bit, and bam, straight into Darkthrone.
I can smell a rat a mile off. Get an idea and stick to your guns. Don't try and be some parody of bands that are already established.
You don't just want to write Transylvanian Hunger 50 times.
I think as soon as the band sits back and thinks they've reached, that's it, we've done it, that's our masterwork, and this will stop.
In general, in music, if you have a very strict set of rules and you just abide to them, then you're going to churn out the same thing over and over again. Like punk, the irony of punk being a rebellious form of music that has a very strict set of rules governing how it can work and run, and if you don't, then you're not punk.
To find your own sound and be unique should be the highest goal. The big thing about being a sheep or a shepherd, isn't it? Do you want to be a follower or a leader?
Because we've got all these bands that are coming out that have got different themes and try to be unique and stuff like that. So I think it's probably more important than ever, really.
For me, getting comfortable and resting on your laurels in a band is very dangerous. For us, we're always challenging ourselves, and every time an album is completed, we take a step back and it's like, right, how can we take this further?
You've got bands like Over that did loads of great albums at the beginning and then really went off the deep end and lost a lot of their fans by completely changing what they were, wholly changing what they were, from a black metal band to an electronic band.
You try to do something a bit different, your fan base will desert you. Yeah, your fan base will desert you for a bit until people hook onto it. And if people hook onto it and you're one of the bands that people do, that's the new thing. And then you'll have 2,000 bands that are trying to emulate exactly what you do.
Sometimes there are bands which you can see are kind of so self-consciously trying to do something new that they're not really creating anything of worth. It's more sort of just an attempt to be different.
My own view on it is that you do need to kind of introduce new things into it to keep it growing incrementally and to try and push things into new areas in a way that complements what you've done before it.
obsessed with Victorian, and I always have been since I was a wee nipper. And in the black metal band, it's nice to have your alter ego names and stuff like that, but we wouldn't want anything that was sort of stereotyped of demons or Tolkien characters or all this kind of stuff, because it's already been done and much better by other people. And so it's like, well, I was thinking about a different way to frame the music, and because I was particularly thinking about that subject, because I do all the time.
We came up with the Corpse of Rebirth after about a year or so of drinking and forgetting what we were doing, and
14 times.
Reading 14 times a very essential part of the process.
The instrumentation, weirdly enough, is kind of irrelevant. It's more about the production, and it's more about the carving out an atmosphere like that. Like, you could have like a nice delayed guitar line, or you could have the creepy electronica stuff, or you can have the haunting violin with the huge palatial reverb on it, or something like that. It's not the actual instruments, it's about how you arrange and write for these things and make them generate an atmosphere.
Actually, the transposition of a melody from one instrument to another, it changes the melody beyond all recognition. Sometimes it's quite surprising how a guitar put to a flute, for instance, just changes the atmosphere of a song entirely, and that's always a fun thing to experiment with, for us. The lyrics focus mainly on death and the mental anguish or acceptance of it. I think that's a fairly...
Yes, exactly,
We're speaking here for Mr. Curse in the way that the lyrics are formed, what his themes are.
This album and the last album, they've been more about the fact that he's been coping with, he's had quite bad illness and stuff with his back, and that's caused loads of problems and long-term illnesses and all this kind of stuff. And so he's also been taking a lot of prescription drugs and everything like that. And so he quite openly talks about how sometimes on the certain drugs, when they hadn't got the doses right and stuff, and he was just away with the fairies or whatever his equivalent is.
To take away.
He's still very strong in his mind, but he's, when the body is sort of collapsing away, and what is it but just this frustrating case that holds him within him.
Friends, thank you for coming to see Winterfylleth.
Britain as a country, in terms of music and culture, I think we've always had a long and successful history of taking styles that have come from elsewhere, like rock and roll or blues, and also adapting it to something which is like real and that's ours and something that we can relate to. It's not surprising that a lot of bands kind of take it as what the Norwegians are doing or were doing at the time when it reached its prominence over there. I think it's just a little bit untrue to it when you've got like British bands who kind of go for the whole snow and frostbitten thing, because it's kind of like it's not what the British landscape is about, I think.
When we first started out, people did wonder if we were an NSBM band. We had various messages questioning it. We had some people who knew us personally jumping to the gun and getting upset.
So I think Eastern Front was wrongly labeled because they used Eastern Front, but then also people don't know about history. Because the Eastern Front was actually on the Allies side, not from the Nazi side.
Well, NSBM was really big. 2007 was like the peak of it. Like a lot of the crowd had NS shirts. Yeah. And it was like the cool thing to be a bit NS.
Seen a couple of Sieg Heils thrown our way, haven't we, at gigs, and we're not fans of that, like. Yeah. That's like one of the last remaining shitty elements of black metal, I suppose.
With the subject matter that we're dealing with, we're in no way glorifying it. And we feel that that's very important, that there is no glory in this. You can still convey the most brutal human acts towards other human beings without glorifying or taking any sort of pleasure in that, and we don't.
It seems like most people, when we go to the gigs, are brought together by music. They're not really necessarily there for politics. I think the problem is that a lot of people like to draw a comparison between the idea of sort of folk tales and kind of having a link with pride of your nation. But it's not something going way better than everyone else, you know? It's saying this is what we grew up with, this is close to our hearts.
It could be, well, let's be anarchistic and just blow everything up and start again. Or you can try and influence the people that are in control to do something differently, or even influence people to overshadow them and kind of, you know, become the voice for reason instead of the voice for profit and, you know, hegemony and all that sort of stuff. People were going through this, and we still are. We haven't learned our lessons from history, and we should. So the heritage thing is we've always gone through these things, and it's part of our history, and yet we live in a cyclical existence of not realising that this is a problem for us, and we need to make a step change, basically.